Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about what is a TBEST segment, route patterns with TBEST routes, route pattern editing, adding a pattern and activating a pattern. Segments toolbar, shortest path tool. We're going to split segments and merge segments and use GIS to assist in drawing segments. Okay, so this section that we're going to talk about now relates to service patterns, and we're going to talk about the alignments, which are made up of segments. So this is the section we're going to talk about. All right, so each TBEST route contains one or more directional patterns. So the example here is Route 47 contains 9 westbound patterns and 4 eastbound patterns. So you can see that the complexity of the route can be very large depending on how it's constructed in the GTFS. So by default, the exact patterns that are in the GTFS will be replicated in TBEST, and each one will be listed under their direction. Each pattern contains alignment defined by a collection of sequential segments and stops. So what that means is that TBEST knows, I mentioned earlier that it's a network. It's not just a shapefile or just kind of something you would display randomly. It actually has to be connected in terms of the segments need to be connected to each other at endpoints, because you can't have a segment sit out in space that isn't connected to the overall alignment. So, so what TBEST does is it manages all of that for you. And it also manages the stops along those segments as well, where it knows the segment that it's attached to, it knows its distance along that segment and its relationship to other stops along that segment and along that route pattern. This is an example of a circulator route in Miami Beach, where you have where the route itself doesn't really traverse the same roadway on the inbound or outbound. It's just a single direction that operates in a loop. So this is a good example of a circulator route inside of TBEST. So what is a TBEST segment? It is a real-world alignment which collectively make up sequential linear geometry of a route pattern. Segment development makes up the most complex network editing task in TBEST. So segments can define an entire route pattern or the alignments between time points. Because TBEST attaches in-vehicle time and speed values to segments, creating segments between known time points is recommended, because if you are building a schedule, generally you're going to build it at time points, and you'll know the running time between time points that you want to implement. So therefore, it's recommended that if you're building a route or route structure, you would break that route up at time points, because you would basically know and understand the speeds that are involved in each section at time points. In order to edit the segment shapes, a route pattern must be activated. Only one route pattern can be active at a time. You can also add a route pattern just by right-clicking on a direction. You can get to a new route pattern and add it. So this would be adding eastbound 88 AM. Maybe there's some trips that are running just in the AM, and you could right-click on it and create it. Okay, so route pattern editing, we've talked about this a little bit already, where you have a single route pattern that you've activated, has this little green arrow button. It activates just that route pattern, segments and stops in the map. It also promotes the segments along that pattern up to the top of the list in the segments panel, so that you can work with them, and they will be shaded in blue. So these two blue segments are attached to this pattern route 10 on route 1 westbound, and so we can edit those directly in relation to this particular route pattern. So in terms of how you would create a new alignment, there are several tools that would help you do that. One is the trace the shortest road network path, and so that uses that Open Route Service API that we talked about earlier to actually get a shortest path on the OpenStreetMaps road network that would then, it's then translated to our local environment. So TBEST doesn't in and of itself have a road network behind the scenes. It actually uses that web API to go out and get that information from the web and bring it back down and display it and use it in a TBEST network. You also have the ability to do a freehand digitizing, so you don't have to use that if you want. If you're going in, let's say you're editing a rail network and you're not going to have a roadway on a rail network, so you might need to do a freehand digitizing of that would be in the rail right of way that you're implementing. So, and likewise with parking lots and other areas where you don't have roadway information, you can use the freehand digitizing to create the segments just by clicking on the map. So there's lots of other ways to create route patterns. You can copy the patterns from one route pattern or copy the segments from one route pattern to another. There's a route realignment tool inside of TBEST that allows you to push and edit that you might have on a particular segment into all intersecting segments at that location. So instead of, if you're changing one alignment and that same alignment exists on multiple patterns, both on the route you're on and maybe on other routes, rather than making that same edit 10 or 15 times, you can use the route realignment tool to push that edit into all of the intersecting and routes in that same space, right? So it's a way to propagate an edit onto multiple intersecting patterns so that you don't have to do that same edit multiple times. You have copy patterns between routes. You can copy patterns in the reverse direction. You can also use the import alignment tool. That is actually a way to import a shapefile alignment directly into a TBEST route pattern so that you can use the geometry that was defined in the shapefile and use that inside of TBEST. Okay, so route pattern GIS tools, you can add any data set, shapefile, file geodatabase, etc. That's an Esri type of data set directly into the map using the add map button. And you have this map control that if you're familiar with ArcGIS, it's very similar to exactly what's in ArcGIS. So if you have that familiarity, you'll know how to navigate this and set the symbology, set the labels, all of the things that you might want to do to a regular GIS layer inside of ArcMap. You can do that same methodology and use their route properties here to define different things. You can import shapefiles and databases directly, meaning that you can add them to the map. You can also add aerial imagery or other imagery to the map. You can export all the map data to directly into ArcMap. We'll get into that extensively tomorrow, so I won't go into that too much today. Okay, so the default layers in TBEST cannot be removed. So there's stops and routes and parcels and census that you cannot remove. They are operational layers and TBEST needs them in order to operate. So even if you try to remove those, you cannot. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the tools that can use. So one of the things that we want to do in our exercise is bring in a GIS layer as basically a background layer so that we can digitize and know the alignment that we want to put into TBEST. You can also use different base maps to help you along as well. So in this example, what we're using is several different base map types that might show different variety of information that would be useful when we're actually digitizing a route pattern. So you might use the default map for just basic editing if you don't need to see any features. You might use the aerial imagery map if you need to go into a parking lot or a place where there is no roadway and you want to make sure that you're going directly up to the building entrance with your route and put the stop right at the entrance to the route to the building. So that's the kind of detail that you might need. If you switch base maps, you can get that information readily and then switch back to another type as you need to. You can also set the default editing display. So by default, there's certain symbols that TBEST will use, but if you're not happy with those, you can change them. And once you set them, every time you use TBEST, it will open up and use whatever symbol changes that you want for your default routes and your active routes. And you can always restore the defaults at any time. Okay. I don't think there's, okay, yes, there are a couple of questions.
Yeah, Matthew Lehane says, can I import the WMTS layer from my base map as a map box? And I guess I could answer this.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Rodney. So yeah, you can add a custom map or an MXD where you have, I guess, an API or a map box or something else like that referenced in the MXD, and that's how you would bring it in. So I think Rodney will show that maybe tomorrow when he looks at the custom base map. But does that answer your question, Matthew? Yeah, so if Rodney goes to base map right now on the top right, and he does custom base map, you can reference an MXD or layer file. And basically, the way I've done it before is do the WMTS, reference in ArcMap, then save it as an MXD, and then you can bring it in. And it works great, actually. So if you have a custom map that you've created through like Mapbox or another server or something, you can totally bring it in.
Yeah. All right, great. Okay, so our next exercise is to do 6.2 segment editor. We're going to add route alignment shapefile to TBEST, which is step 1. Okay, so we're going to use in this step the map control, and we want to make sure that our TDP 2030 scenario is open. I'm going to go ahead and save my edits from before. So remember, we created our new route 88, and I would just want to save that before I proceed. So what we want to do is click on the map control tab over here on the right, and you can see where it says auto hide, this little pin is here. Go ahead and click that pin, and that will bring in the map control into where we can work with a little bit inside of TBEST. All right, so I'll resize my routes panel, make sure I have enough real estate. If I want to, I can even auto hide my Explorer panel. So now I have even more real estate over here on the side because we are going to be working with the map, and I want to make sure I have as much real estate as I can on the map. Okay, so step 2 is to reorder the TBEST map layers. Click and hold on a layer in the TBEST panel and drag to desired rank. Click the checkmark button to toggle layers on and off. So this is more of just us kind of seeing what we can do in the map control. So here's our map control. If we want to move our world topo map and move it up the chain, we can do that. So now it sits on top of our routes. Other than the stops, that's all it sits on. It sits on top of everything else. If we move it back down, our routes become visible. And if we move it all the way to the bottom, we can do that. The other step of this is just a test to show some other layers that are here. So if we want to toggle on the parcel data, this is the actual parcel data that's kind of sitting behind the scenes, and we want it to sit behind the scenes. We'll use it on occasion, but generally this is something that we would pull out of TBEST as part of a market analysis or land use and market analysis. We don't necessarily need it right here unless we needed to do an identify, where we could do an identify here and it would, show us some information about the parcel data at that location. So this is just, the identify button is just a standard identify that's basically the same as what's in ArcMap. Okay, so let's toggle off the parcels. So now we're back to where we were before. All right, step 3, to change the map base map, select OpenStreetMap from the dropdown. So right now we were on custom base map, but really we want to see our OpenStreetMap option here. So this option. Okay, so this brings in our OpenStreetMap, and we can zoom in a little bit because the detail on this is pretty good, and it really is helpful for seeing what's actually on the ground, both in terms of open spaces or commercial areas that we might want to focus on. Here's the University of Florida. Here's a green space, etc., right? So it's a really great way of focusing on the land use that's on the ground via a base map. Some other base maps that are available include the aerial imagery. So if we switch to aerial, it will switch, take a minute. You'll notice that it also switches here in the map control. Okay. So let's go back to our light gray base. And here we are back to where we were before. So item 4 is to edit the default route rendering, ensure the render routes panel is visible in pin. So the render routes panel is here. We can also pin this, and it also comes in right here. Now, one of the neat things you can do with this, if you have stacked panels like this, is you can click this toggle tabs, and it will actually put all these into a tab for you. So then you can switch back and forth between them. So if we want to go to our render routes, this is where we can change our active route. So we can double click on this, and this is the symbol that's the default symbol for an active route. But you can change this. You can make it be a yellow color and say okay. And then the next time that you would activate a route, let's say we activate 12 westbound, double click on it. So now it's showing as yellow instead of blue in the map. And it will continue to do that until you come back to render routes and you say restore defaults, and then it puts it back to the default. Okay, there is a couple other modes here, the route type render and transit mode render, where you can actually switch it will color all of your routes based on the route types or the transit mode. And inside of this, you can set the line width, the stop size, or you can make this visible or not visible. So if we just wanted to see bus routes or heavy rail routes, we would unselect all these. They would show up as green. This would be their line width and stop size. So it's just a different, easy way to kind of construct a different map based on the definitions of your route type and mode. But we can easily switch back to default route display in editing, and that will switch all the way back to where we were when we started. Okay, step 5 is to add a new shapefile to the map. So we select the add data button in the map window. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle my tabs back away. So I'm going to stack them up again. And I'm actually going to pin and auto hide the render routes. We don't really need that one anymore. So I'm going to take that one away. And again, it sits over here. You could also close it if you want it to go away entirely. Okay. So what I want to do is add some data to the map. And so I'm going to hit the add data button on my map control. And we're going to go to the Gatorville data Route 88 alignment folder. So I need to go up one directory here and go to Route 88 alignment and go to the routes shapefile. So that is in TBEST Transit Systems Gatorville data Route 88 alignment, and select the routes shapefile. Okay, great. So here's what I want to do. I want to now zoom to that and set some properties for it. So we have our routes. So this is what we just added, our routes shapefile. So I'm going to zoom to that layer. So here's the layer that I just added. And I also want to right click on it and set the layer properties. So this is the properties dialog for a layer that's very similar, if not exactly the same, to the one you would use in ArcMap. So we want to set a single symbol for this, and we want to just change that symbol to a highway symbol so we can see it. Okay, great. So now it really stands out and we can reference it when we're digitizing our route. The next thing I want to do is just make sure that it doesn't draw on top of all of the other TBEST route layers. So I'm going to drag it down below and right above the parcels layer. So I'm going to drag it and drop it right there. Okay. All right, so great. And we have a route layer we want to digitize, and we're going to start with that on the next slide.
So let's go on to step 2 in the procedure, which is digitize the Route 88 alignment westbound. Okay. So this is probably the trickiest part, and I'll just kind of do some cleanup work. I'm going to pin the Explorer panel. I'm also going to pin the map control, and I'm going to move this to give as much real estate on the map as possible. So what we want to do is we want to begin editing our new Route 88 westbound. So in order to do that, we're going to double click on that pattern, 88 westbound 1 pattern that was created whenever we created the route. Okay, so essentially we want to start from the stadium, correct, right? Yes, from the stadium. And we want to come up, definition, West University, and then go out West Newberry Road and out 75, across 75, turn left on Parker and down to Southwest 24th. So you can see the alignment here. Hopefully you guys can see it on your own. But we're going to start at this location, and we're going to come up and over. And then basically when we're done, we're going to come all the way out across 75, here's 75, out and down Parker Road and out Southwest 24th. And then we're going to end at Lawton Childs Elementary right here. All right. So this is not a route that's kind of in practice or in planning stages. This is really just something for us to test our skills with. So, so let's begin. And what we want to do is use the shortest path segment alignment. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit closer. And what I want you all to do is just watch me for a minute. Okay. Just kind of see what I do, and don't try to do this just yet. Just watch some of the things that I tell you about this. So on the toolbar, the segments toolbar, you have a define shortest path segment tool that I'll click that, and it goes into the shortest path mode, right? But it won't start doing that until I first click a start point. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to start right here at the stadium. So I'll just start at this location, and I'll click once. And when I'll move my cursor, the line will follow my cursor. It'll be a little bit delayed, but not too much. And what that is the shortest path on the roadway network between my cursor and the begin point, right? And it may not take a path that you think is right. And so that's fine, because what we can do is we can edit it. So, so basically this is the alignment that we want to take, which is up through campus. And then what we can do is we can set a point, a waypoint. So I just clicked and it added a point. And so the shortest path now will be from this last waypoint to wherever my cursor is. So it keeps following my cursor, but it's not going to deviate from that last point that I just clicked. So what I can do is I can just come all the way out and basically just click again to add another waypoint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my arrow key to pan. So I don't have to stop digitizing at this point. All I have to do is hit my arrow key, and then I pan out across, right? So I can still just keep digitizing, and it's just going to follow my cursor, continue to follow my cursor. I'm going to add another point right here, waypoint, and it's going to again kind of just solidify that it's taking the shortest path from that location. All right, so we're going to keep going. We're still headed out on Newberry Road towards Tioga. And we're now going to set another waypoint right here. We made the turn down into Parker. And we're going to pan down, use the arrow key to pan down. Continue to pan because it's still active and it still follow my cursor. Here it is, still following my cursor. And so right around here is the elementary school. And what we can do is double click to end this segment. So when I double click that, a couple things are going to happen. Number one is it's going to input the segment into the network, and it's also going to pick up any stops that are along that particular alignment that exist in the network and add them to this one. So it's going to see that there's already stops on this alignment that are on other routes. So we're going to, by default, pick those up and add them to this new alignment. All right, so what you see is that, wait a second, this is all red here. Where's my alignment? Well, that's a good question. So basically what we have is this root, that layer that we had in order of hierarchy of draws is sitting on top of our Gainesville routes. So we don't want that. So we can actually drag this down. And now we see our blue route is now on top of the red route, which is what we want. Now, schematically, that doesn't mean anything. It's really just for display. So just bear that in mind. So what you see is that we started at this location. We came out University onto Newberry and then completed our alignment. And it picked up all these different stops that existed along Newberry already and added them to the network. So in our list of segments, we have Route 88 right here. That's our one segment. I've just selected it in the list. And so you can see it's highlighted here. You also have a list of stops, right? So it starts here at Weimer Hall, and you can see that it is selected. And I'll just clear this selection so we can see it a little better. It goes to University, Lutheran, to Hillel House, to a couple other, and you can see they're all in sequence, right? So what TBEST knows is that where these stops exist along the segment in relation to every other stop, right, along this segment. So that's one of the things that what this does is that it keeps the kind of network integrity. So it's not just a shapefile, it's a network, right? So just keep that in mind when you're digitizing, that TBEST will pick this up and use it. Okay. So a couple of things I want to show you about the particulars there. I showed you the panning, which is good. And it's really the recommended way to do this is to use those arrow keys to pan. You can move up to your pan button and use it that way, but you actually have to come back down and start digitizing again. The shortest path to pick it up again. So you have to go here to pan and then come back to your defined shortest path to pick it back up again. So that's a little more cumbersome to do that. So the recommended way is to use the arrow keys. You can also zoom in and out using the keyboard. So I left the shortcuts there in the instructions, the Control I and Control O to zoom in and out. Also, if you're digitizing, you can use the delete key to delete a waypoint, your last waypoint that you digitized. And you can use the escape key to come out of it altogether. So if I want to start another shortest path, and I want to start at this endpoint, and I'm coming down through Yale Plantation, and I want to get out of this, I don't want to do this anymore, I hit escape, and then I'm out, okay? And if I am digitizing and I set a waypoint here, and then, you know, I come here and I'm like, oh, I don't really want this last waypoint that I use. I just use the delete key and it will take away the last waypoint, and I can use it again and it takes away that waypoint. So those are really handy tips because this can get a little, it's actively following your cursor, so it can get a little wacky what happens to these shortest paths. So you need to be able to control the paths using the waypoints. So that will take me straight down this road and not take me into the development if I want to stay on a major road, etc. Right? So if I wanted to insert this, I could double click and it would insert it. And now all of a sudden I have this segment, which was my original one. And now I have this segment as well. So I have two segments. And if I don't want that segment, I can just delete it. So I will remove that segment and it's gone. All right. And so, so it makes it pretty simple. Now, one of the things you can do here is, and this kind of makes sense once you think about it. If I start digitizing a segment out here in space and I say, well, I want this segment on my route, right? Well, it's not going to let you do that because it's not connected in any way to this route. You've already defined this particular segment as a route or as your primary segment or your first segment. So if you add another one, it has to connect to it in some way. So it has to connect here or here at the beginning or the end in order for it to insert it. Now, there's lots of tools for splitting a segment into two. You can merge them into one, and you can realign them. So there's other ways to do that kind of editing of your route. And so with that, I will then kind of let you guys use the tool to digitize this particular route alignment. And I will start from the beginning. So I went a little too far with mine, and I'm just going to use the delete key to delete that last waypoint. That way I can back up my endpoint and insert it here. Matt, any questions or chats?
No, I think the person that had problems earlier is still having a little problem, so I'm going to do a breakout room with them. So,
Okay.
give me 1 second. So I might be unavailable for a little bit.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, to finish my, well, actually, sorry. So for the eastbound pattern, I want to start digitizing that now. So basically it's going to start from this endpoint. But before I start digitizing, I need to activate the eastbound pattern for editing. So in order to do that, I just double click on it over here in the list of routes and the pattern for 88, the eastbound one. So now I don't have any segments. I don't have any stops. I need to create them. So I'm going to start at the endpoint, which you can see it. It's kind of behind things, but you can see it right here. So I'm going to start right here. And again, I'm going to just use the shortest path to kind of follow along with my cursor. Oops, didn't want that. When I get back to the endpoint, I'm going to double click. Okay, so what you can see is that it picked up the stops that are on the right side of it only. So it knows which stops are on the right side, it picks those up and adds them to the eastbound pattern as well. All right, excellent. Okay, let's move on to our next topic here. Actually, let's save. Everybody probably needs to save their scenarios, so just click the save button.